Exploring history for sleep. The most bizarre biblical miracles you've never heard of. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that might surprise you. The biblical miracles that Hollywood never talks about. The ones that Sunday school skips over. And the ones that reveal just how strange and wonderful the ancient world really was. You think you know biblical miracles? You probably know about the parting of the Red Sea, the multiplication of loaves and fishes, maybe the walls of Jericho falling down. But tonight, we're diving into the forgotten corners of Scripture, where the miraculous meets the bizarre, where divine intervention takes forms that would make modern audiences scratch their heads in bewilderment. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, especially when we're about to explore stories that have been captivating humanity for thousands of years. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going to explore miracles that reveal the ancient world's understanding of the divine, the miraculous, and the downright inexplicable. These aren't just stories. They're windows into cultures that saw the supernatural as part of everyday life, where the line between the possible and impossible was far more fluid than we imagine today. Tonight, you'll discover why ancient people weren't as surprised by miracles as we might be, and why some of the most powerful biblical miracles are the ones that history has quietly forgotten. You're standing by the Jordan River in the 9th century BCE, watching a group of prophets, the sons of the prophets, as they were called, working to build themselves a new dwelling place. The air is thick with the sounds of chopping wood and the occasional splash as logs fall into the muddy waters. These weren't wealthy men. They were religious students, basically, living simple lives dedicated to learning and serving God. Every tool they owned was precious, borrowed, or shared. Imagine you're one of these young prophets, swinging a borrowed iron axe head. Iron was expensive in ancient Israel. So expensive that losing a piece could mean working for months to pay it back. The rhythmic thud of your axe against the wood suddenly changes to a hollow whoosh as the iron head flies off its handle and disappears into the murky Jordan with a splash that might as well have been the sound of your future disappearing. Alas, my master, for it was borrowed. You cry out to Elisha, the prophet who leads your group. The Hebrew word used here, Sheol, carries the weight of a formal loan, a debt that must be repaid. This wasn't just inconvenience. It was potential financial ruin for someone who owned practically nothing. But here's where the story takes a turn that reveals something profound about ancient understanding of the divine. Elisha doesn't pray dramatically, doesn't call down fire from heaven, doesn't perform any elaborate ritual. He simply cuts a stick, throws it into the water at the spot where the axe head fell, and watches as the iron floats to the surface like a cork. The young prophet reaches out and grabs it. Crisis averted. Lesson learned. You might think this is just a minor miracle, a small kindness from a loving God. But in the ancient world, this was revolutionary. Iron doesn't float. Everyone knew that. The very elements of creation were bending to accommodate the needs of a poor student. This wasn't just about retrieving a tool. It was about demonstrating that the God of Israel cared about the smallest details of daily life, that the divine could interrupt the natural order for the most mundane concerns. The story appears in 2 Kings 6 to 1-7, tucked between much more dramatic tales of war and political intrigue. But for the ancient audience, this quiet miracle spoke volumes about the nature of divine power. It wasn't just reserved for kings and great prophets. It was available for the everyday struggles of ordinary people trying to make their way in a harsh world. You're lying on your deathbed in the royal palace of Jerusalem, and your king Hezekiah of Judah. The year is approximately 701 BCE, and you've just received news that no king wants to hear. The prophet Isaiah has told you to set your house in order because you're about to die. The Assyrian Empire is breathing down your neck. Your kingdom is in crisis, and now your own body is failing you. The boil on your body, likely a life-threatening infection, has brought you to death's door. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. After pleading with God, you receive a promise that you'll live for 15 more years. That's a specific number, not a vague, "you'll get better." But even more remarkable than the promise of healing is the sign that accompanies it, a sign so impossible that it challenges everything we think we know about the nature of time and space. Isaiah asks you to choose. Should the shadow on the sundial go forward 10 degrees or backward 10 degrees? You, being a wise king, choose the more difficult option. Anyone can make a shadow move forward. That's what shadows do naturally as the sun moves across the sky. But to make a shadow move backward, that's asking for time itself to reverse. And that's exactly what happens. The shadow on the sundial of Ahaz moves backward 10 degrees. In our modern understanding, this would require the Earth to temporarily reverse its rotation, or the sun to move backward in its apparent path across the sky. The Hebrew text uses the word degrees, malat, which could refer to the steps of a staircase sundial or to actual degrees of celestial movement. You witness something that defies every natural law you understand. The Babylonian astronomers, who were meticulous record keepers of celestial events, apparently noticed this phenomenon too. Later historical sources suggest they sent envoys to investigate this astronomical impossibility that occurred in the land of Judah. The miracle serves multiple purposes in the narrative. It's a sign of divine power, yes, but it's also a demonstration that the God of Israel has authority over creation itself. Time, which seems so fixed and unchangeable, becomes fluid in the presence of divine will. The very cosmos adjusts to accommodate God's promise to a faithful king. This isn't just ancient mythology. It's a claim about the nature of reality itself. The story suggests that time isn't the rigid, unchangeable force we experience it to be. In the presence of the divine, even the most fundamental aspects of existence can be altered, rewound, or redirected. You're sitting in a circle with about 100 other men in the hill country of Ephraim, sometime during the ministry of Elisha. The year is around 850 BCE, and the land is experiencing one of its periodic famines. Food is scarce, people are hungry, and you're part of a group of prophets who have gathered to hear teaching and share whatever meager provisions can be found. One of the younger men has volunteered to go out and gather herbs for the communal pot. He returns with his garment full of what he thinks are edible plants, including some wild gourds that look harmless enough. The cook throws everything into the large pot, and soon the aroma of vegetable stew fills the air. Your stomach growls in anticipation. You haven't had a proper meal in days. But as soon as you take your first bite, you realize something is terribly wrong. The taste is bitter, burning, and you immediately recognize the signs of poisoning. There is death in the pot. Someone cries out in Hebrew, Mavat Basur, and everyone stops eating immediately. The wild gourds were colocynth, a poisonous plant that could cause severe illness or death if consumed in sufficient quantities. Here you are, 100 hungry men, with a pot full of deadly stew and no other food available. In the ancient world, this would typically be the end of the story, a tragic accident during desperate times. But Elisha responds in a way that seems almost casual, as if poisoned food is just another everyday problem to be solved. Bring meal, he says simply. Someone produces a small amount of flour, which Elisha throws into the pot. He stirs it once, then declares, serve it to the people that they may eat. The Hebrew word used for meal here is kemek, referring to fine flour, a precious commodity during famine times. You watch in amazement as the same stew that moments ago threatened to kill you now becomes not just safe, but nourishing. The bitterness is gone, replaced by the satisfying taste of wholesome food. The poison has been neutralized, not through any chemical process that makes sense, but through the simple addition of flour and the word of a prophet. This miracle reveals something profound about the ancient understanding of blessing and curse. The same substance that carried death now carries life. The natural properties of the poison don't simply disappear, they're transformed. The meal becomes a demonstration that divine power can work through the most ordinary substances, flour, water, ordinary ingredients, to accomplish extraordinary things. You're part of a burial party in the Kingdom of Israel, sometime during the final years of Elisha's life. The prophet has been dead for some time now, but his reputation for miracles continues to echo through the land. You're carrying the body of a man who died unexpectedly, making your way to the burial grounds outside the city. The day's hot, the burden is heavy, and you're focused on the solemn task at hand. Suddenly, one of your companions shouts a warning. Moabite raiders. You look up to see a band of foreign soldiers approaching in the distance. These aren't merchants or travelers. They're armed men on horseback, probably looking for plunder or captives to take back across the Jordan. Your group is defenseless, burdened with the body, and far from the protection of the city walls. Panic sets in. You need to hide, but there's no time to dig a proper grave or find a secure hiding place. Someone spots the tomb of Elisha nearby, a cave sealed with a stone, like many burial places of that era. There, he shouts, pointing to the prophet's tomb. We can hide the body there until the raiders pass. You help carry the corpse toward Elisha's tomb, rolling away the stone with great effort. The interior is cool and dark, and you can see the bones of the prophet lying on a stone shelf, wrapped in decaying cloth. With no time for ceremony, you lower the body into the tomb, planning to retrieve it later for proper burial. But the moment the dead man's body touches the bones of Elisha, something extraordinary happens. The corpse suddenly draws breath, sits up, and stands on his feet. The Hebrew text uses the word vayehi, and it came to pass, suggesting this wasn't gradual but instantaneous. One moment you're handling a dead body, the next you're staring at a living, breathing man who was definitely deceased moments before. The miracle is so unexpected that it's almost casual in its telling. The text doesn't dwell on the resurrection itself, but simply states it as fact. The man touched Elisha's bones and lived. This suggests that in the ancient world, such events, while remarkable, weren't considered impossible. The power that had worked through Elisha during his lifetime continued to work through his remains after death. This resurrection is different from the others recorded in Scripture. There's no prayer, no dramatic declaration, no calling upon divine power. The miracle happens through simple physical contact with the bones of a man who had demonstrated God's power during his lifetime. It suggests that holiness, once established, can transcend death itself. You're a Syrian soldier in the service of the king of Aram, and you're part of a carefully planned military operation. The year is around 850 BCE, and your commander has received intelligence about the movements of the Israelite army. The plan is simple: ambush them at a specific location, achieve a decisive victory, and demonstrate Syrian military superiority. Your army is well-trained, well-equipped, and confident. But as you advance toward the designated location, something seems off. The Israelites aren't where your spies said they would be. In fact, they appear to have changed their route entirely, avoiding the ambush as if they knew exactly where you would be waiting. This isn't the first time this has happened. Recent military operations have been mysteriously unsuccessful, as if the enemy has access to your battle plans. Your king is furious. Someone must be leaking information to the Israelites. He calls his officers together and demands to know which of them is the traitor. But one of your fellow soldiers speaks up with an explanation that's even more unsettling than betrayal. None, my lord, O king. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. The idea that an enemy prophet can hear private conversations in the royal palace is deeply disturbing. But your king decides to capture this Elisha and end the problem once and for all. Intelligence reports place the prophet in the small town of Dothan, and your army is dispatched to surround the city during the night. You're part of a force that includes horses, chariots, and hundreds of soldiers. Overwhelming force against one old man. As dawn breaks, you position yourself with the rest of the army around Dothan. The city is completely surrounded. There's no escape route, but when Elisha's servant looks out and sees your army, he panics. "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" he cries. The Hebrew word, aha, expresses not just fear, but complete despair in the face of impossible odds. Then something happens that changes everything. Elisha prays a simple prayer. "Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." And suddenly, the servant sees what was there all the time. The mountain is full of horses and chariots of fire surrounding Elisha. The divine army vastly outnumbers your earthly force. But the real miracle is what happens next. Elisha prays again, this time asking God to strike the Syrian army with blindness. And suddenly, you can't see properly. The Hebrew word used is sanvarim, which doesn't necessarily mean total blindness, but rather confusion, disorientation. You can see, but you can't make sense of what you're seeing. You're one of the Israelites who's just crossed the Red Sea, and you're experiencing the incredible high of miraculous deliverance. The Egyptian army lies drowned behind you. The waters that threatened to destroy you have become the means of your salvation. And you're finally free after generations of slavery. The singing and dancing have gone on for hours, and you feel like you could walk on air. But now, 3 days later, that euphoria has faded into something much more mundane and desperate. Thirst. You're walking through the wilderness of Shur, and every step takes you further from the life-giving waters of the Red Sea and deeper into a landscape that seems designed to kill you. The sun beats down mercilessly. Your water supplies are running low, and you're beginning to understand that freedom comes with its own set of challenges. Then, just when hope seems lost, someone ahead shouts, "Water." You pick up your pace, imagining the relief of cool, clear water flowing over your parched lips. But as you approach the springs of Mara, your excitement turns to bitter disappointment. The water is there, all right. Plenty of it, but it's undrinkable. The Hebrew name Mara means bitter, and one taste tells you why. The water has a harsh, alkaline taste that makes you gag. You watch as person after person tries to drink, only to spit it out in disgust. Some people try to force it down, but it only makes them feel sick. You're surrounded by water, but you might as well be in the middle of a desert. The irony is almost too much to bear. God saved you from the Egyptians, only to let you die of thirst in the wilderness. The people begin to murmur against Moses, and you find yourself joining in. What shall we drink? Becomes the question on everyone's lips. The Hebrew word lun, used here, implies not just complaining, but a deep, bitter resentment. The miracle of the Red Sea already feels like ancient history. What matters now is your immediate, desperate need. But then Moses does something that seems almost too simple to work. He cries out to the Lord, and God shows him a piece of wood. Not a special piece of wood, not a carved idol or magical talisman, just a tree. Moses takes the wood and throws it into the bitter water, and suddenly the entire spring is transformed. The water that was undrinkable moments before becomes sweet and refreshing. You cup your hands and drink deeply, and the water tastes better than anything you've ever had. The transformation is complete and immediate. There's no gradual improvement, no partial change. The bitter has become sweet through the simple addition of wood and divine intervention. You're a widow in ancient Israel, and your world has just collapsed. Your husband, who was one of the sons of the prophets, has died, leaving you with nothing but debts and 2 young sons to care for. The creditor is coming today, and according to the law, he has the right to take your sons as slaves to pay off what your husband owed. You've exhausted every option, sold everything you own, and still, it's not enough. The knock on your door comes at dawn. You open it to find the creditor standing there with legal documents and several strong men. "The debt must be paid," he says simply. "If you cannot pay, I will take your sons." The Hebrew law that allows this seems heartless, but it's the reality of your world. Debt slavery was common, and widows had few legal protections. In desperation, you seek out the prophet Elisha. You explain your situation, your voice breaking as you describe the thought of losing your children. Elisha listens compassionately, then asks a question that seems almost insulting in its simplicity. What do you have in your house? You want to scream that if you had anything of value, you wouldn't be here. But you answer honestly. Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil. It's not even a full jar, just a small container with a little oil in the bottom, barely enough to cook one meal. But Elisha sees potential where you see poverty. Go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, he instructs. Empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. The Hebrew word rekim emphasizes that these containers must be completely empty, ready to receive. You feel foolish asking your neighbors for empty jars and bowls, but desperation drives you forward. Some look at you with pity, others with suspicion, but most respond with kindness. Soon your house is filled with borrowed containers of every size and shape. Your sons help you arrange them, and you find yourself with dozens of empty vessels. Then comes the moment that changes everything. You begin to pour from your small jar of oil into the first empty container. The oil flows steadily, filling the vessel to the brim, but instead of your jar becoming empty, it remains full. You move to the next container, and the same thing happens. The oil continues to flow, defying every law of physics you understand. Container after container fills with oil, each one receiving a full measure from your impossibly abundant jar. The Hebrew text emphasizes the continuous nature of this miracle. Vadatzak, she kept pouring. The oil doesn't just multiply. It flows in an endless stream, as if your small jar has become connected to some infinite source. You're standing on Mount Carmel in the 9th century BCE, and you're witnessing what might be the most dramatic confrontation between two worldviews that the ancient world has ever seen. On one side stand 450 prophets of Baal, the Canaanite storm god, along with 400 prophets of Asherah. On the other side stands one man, Elijah, the prophet of the God of Israel. The entire nation has gathered to watch this contest that will determine once and for all which God is real. The challenge is simple. Both sides will prepare a sacrifice, but neither will light the fire. The God who answers by sending fire from heaven will be acknowledged as the true God. It seems like a fair test, especially since Baal is supposed to be the god of storms and lightning. If anyone should be able to send fire from heaven, it should be him. You watch as the prophets of Baal go first. They prepare their bull, arrange the wood, and begin their ritual. What follows is hours of increasingly frantic activity. They call on Baal's name. They dance around the altar. They work themselves into a religious frenzy. The Hebrew word pasek describes their limping dance, possibly a ritual intended to mimic the movement of storm clouds or the limping of their god. As the day wears on and nothing happens, their desperation grows. They begin to cut themselves with knives and lances, believing that their own blood might somehow motivate their god to act. You watch in fascination and horror as they cry out louder and louder, their voices becoming hoarse, their movements more erratic. But heaven remains silent. Elijah, meanwhile, spends the day mocking their efforts. Cry aloud, for he is a god, he taunts. Either he is meditating, or he is busy, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened. The Hebrew word, sayak, can mean meditating or relieving himself. Elijah may be suggesting that Baal is in the bathroom, unable to respond to his followers' prayers. Finally, as evening approaches, it's Elijah's turn. But instead of simply preparing his sacrifice, he does something that seems designed to make success impossible. He orders the people to fill 4 barrels with water and pour it on the sacrifice. Then he has them do it again and again. 12 barrels of water in total. Precious water in a land experiencing drought. are poured over the sacrifice until it's completely soaked and water fills the trench around the altar. Then Elijah prays a simple, brief prayer. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant. No shouting, no dancing, no cutting himself. Just a quiet request for divine intervention. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Fire falls from heaven, consuming not just the sacrifice and the wood, but the stones of the altar, the dust around it, and all the water in the trench. The Hebrew word akel means to devour or consume completely. This isn't just fire. It's divine fire that consumes everything it touches. You're working alongside a group of young prophets by the Jordan River, and you're part of an ambitious construction project. The sons of the prophets have outgrown their current dwelling place and need somewhere larger to live and study. It's honest work, but in the ancient world, good tools are expensive and hard to come by. Most of what you're using is borrowed, shared, or handed down from previous generations. The particular axe you're using belongs to someone else, and you're acutely aware of its value. Iron was still relatively rare in ancient Israel, and a good axe head represented a significant investment. You've been careful with it all morning, but as you swing it overhead to strike a particularly stubborn piece of wood, disaster strikes. The iron head flies off the wooden handle and disappears into the murky waters of the Jordan with a splash that echoes like a death knell. Alas, my master, for it was borrowed. You cry out to Elisha, who's been supervising the work. The Hebrew word shal implies a formal loan, something that must be returned in exactly the same condition it was received. This isn't just about losing a tool. It's about your reputation, your integrity, and your ability to repay a debt that might take months of work to satisfy. The Jordan River at this point is deep and muddy, its waters colored brown by the sediment it carries from the mountains. You can't see the bottom, and the current is strong enough that the axe head has probably already been carried downstream. In the ancient world, this would typically be the end of the story, a costly accident that would result in long-term debt or damaged relationships. But Elisha responds with characteristic calm. Where did it fall? He asks, and you point to the approximate spot where the axe head disappeared. You're not even sure exactly where it went in, but you do your best to indicate the general area. The prophet cuts a stick from a nearby tree, nothing special, just an ordinary piece of wood, and throws it into the water at the spot you indicated. What happens next defies everything you know about the natural world. The iron axe head, which should be sitting on the river bottom, floats to the surface like a piece of cork. You stare in amazement as the heavy metal bobs on the water's surface, clearly visible and within reach. The Hebrew text emphasizes the miraculous nature of this event by noting that the iron swam, the same word used for living creatures moving through water. You reach out and pluck the axe head from the water, feeling its familiar weight in your hand. It's completely undamaged, ready to be reattached to its handle and put back to work. The crisis has passed, but the implications of what you've witnessed are staggering. The natural law that governs density and buoyancy has been temporarily suspended. Iron, one of the heaviest and most practical metals known to your world, has behaved like wood. You're living in the bustling city of Ephesus during the 1st century CE, and you're witnessing something that's revolutionizing how people think about divine power and healing. The Apostle Paul has been preaching and teaching in your city for over 2 years, and his ministry has taken on characteristics that seem almost magical, except that Paul himself would be horrified by that description. The unusual aspect of Paul's ministry in Ephesus isn't just the healing that happens when he lays hands on people. It's what happens when he doesn't even need to be present. You've seen people take handkerchiefs and aprons that have touched Paul's skin and carry them to sick relatives across the city. These aren't elaborate religious artifacts or specially blessed objects. They're ordinary pieces of cloth that have absorbed Paul's sweat during his daily work as a tent maker. The Greek word sudarion refers to a face cloth or handkerchief, while simikinthion describes the apron worn by craftsmen. These are practical, everyday items that Paul uses in his regular work. But when they're placed on sick people, extraordinary things happen. Diseases leave, evil spirits depart, and people are restored to health through contact with cloth that has simply been in contact with Paul's body. You watch as a woman brings a handkerchief to her paralyzed husband. She places it on his forehead, and within moments, feeling returns to his limbs. A man with a persistent fever finds immediate relief when an apron that touched Paul's skin is laid across his chest. The healing isn't gradual or partial. It's complete and immediate, as if the very fabric has become a conduit for divine power. What makes this even more remarkable is that Paul doesn't need to know about these healings, doesn't need to pray specifically for each person, and doesn't need to have faith in the outcome. The power seems to flow through him so consistently that even objects that have touched him become vehicles for healing. It's as if his body has become so saturated with divine presence that it overflows into everything around him. This phenomenon troubles some people in Ephesus, particularly those who practice magic arts. They see Paul's handkerchiefs and aprons as competition for their own magical implements. Some Jewish exorcists even try to replicate Paul's success by using his name as a kind of magical formula, with disastrous results. But for those who approach Paul's ministry with genuine faith, these simple pieces of cloth become sources of hope and healing. The writer of Acts notes that these miracles were not ordinary. The Greek phrase "o tas taichasis" suggests something beyond the normal range of miraculous activity. Even in a world where miracles were more commonly accepted, Paul's handkerchiefs and aprons represented something unprecedented. Divine power was flowing through such mundane objects that the distinction between sacred and secular was becoming blurred. You're in the court of King Jehoiakim of Judah, and you're witnessing one of the most dramatic confrontations between divine revelation and human pride in recorded history. The year is 605 BCE, and the Babylonian Empire is rising to power, threatening the independence of small kingdoms like Judah. The prophet Jeremiah has been declaring God's judgment on the nation, and today his words are being read publicly in the royal court. The scroll in question contains oracles that Jeremiah has been proclaiming for over 20 years. His scribe, Baruch, has carefully recorded every word, creating a document that represents the complete revelation of God's plans for Judah and the surrounding nations. It's not just a collection of prophecies. It's a comprehensive indictment of the nation's spiritual and political failures. As you watch, Jehudi, one of the royal officials, reads from the scroll in the king's presence. The words are harsh and uncompromising, predicting exile, destruction, and the end of the kingdom as everyone knows it. Jeremiah's voice, speaking through the written word, declares that resistance to Babylon is futile and that submission to Nebuchadnezzar is God's will for the nation. King Jehoiakim listens to the reading with growing anger. The Hebrew text describes his reaction as he hears prophecies that directly challenge his authority and policies. Rather than responding with repentance or even serious consideration of the message, he decides to make a dramatic gesture of defiance. He calls for a knife and begins cutting up the scroll as it's being read. But here's where the story becomes truly remarkable. Each time Jehudi finishes reading a few columns, the king cuts that portion of the scroll and throws it into the fire burning in the brazier beside him. You watch as the precious parchment, covered with carefully written Hebrew script, curls and burns in the flames. The king seems to believe that by destroying the words, he can somehow negate their power or prevent their fulfillment. The physical destruction of the scroll is complete. Every piece of parchment has been consumed by fire, every word reduced to ash. In the ancient world, this would typically represent the end of the prophetic message. If the words are destroyed, the prophecy dies with them. But God's response to this act of defiance demonstrates that divine revelation cannot be silenced by human resistance. God commands Jeremiah to take another scroll and rewrite everything that was in the first one. But this time, the message is expanded and intensified. The Hebrew phrase Yosef Aleichem means Add to them, the new scroll contains not just the original prophecies, but additional words of judgment specifically directed at King Jehoiakim's act of defiance. The second scroll becomes, in effect, a resurrection of the first. Every word that was burned is restored, and new words of judgment are added. The king's attempt to silence God's voice through physical destruction has backfired spectacularly. Instead of ending the prophetic message, his actions have made it more comprehensive and more severe. You're traveling with Balaam, the famous diviner from Pethor, on what should be a lucrative business trip. You're his servant, managing the supplies and tending to his donkey as you make your way toward Moab. King Balak has offered substantial payment for Balaam's services. He wants the renowned prophet to curse the Israelites who are camped on his borders. It's the kind of assignment that could make you both wealthy. Balaam is riding his donkey, the same animal that has served him faithfully for years. This isn't just any donkey. She's proven herself reliable, sure-footed, and obedient. You've never seen her act unpredictably or refuse to follow Balaam's commands. She's as much a part of his professional equipment as his divination tools. But suddenly, the donkey stops dead in her tracks. She won't move forward no matter how much Balaam urges her. From your position behind them, you can't see any obvious obstacle. The road ahead appears clear, the path is familiar, and there's no apparent reason for the animal's refusal to continue. Balaam becomes increasingly frustrated, eventually striking the donkey with his staff to force her forward. The pattern repeats itself twice more. Each time, the donkey sees something that causes her to react with fear, first turning aside into a field, then crushing Balaam's foot against a wall while trying to avoid something, and finally lying down completely under him. Each time, Balaam's anger grows, and his treatment of the animal becomes more violent. You watch as he beats the donkey with his staff, furious at what appears to be inexplicable stubborn behavior. But then something happens that changes everything. The donkey opens her mouth and speaks in clear, articulate Hebrew. "What have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times?" The voice is unmistakably coming from the animal, but the words are rational, defensive, and perfectly formed. You stare in amazement as the donkey engages in a logical conversation with her master. What's even more remarkable is how matter-of-factly this conversation proceeds. Balaam doesn't seem shocked that his donkey is talking. He responds as if this is simply an unusual but not impossible occurrence. "Because you have abused me," he replies. "I wish there were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you." The Hebrew word hit'alt suggests that Balaam feels the donkey has made a fool of him, embarrassed him in front of his servant. The donkey's response is both logical and touching. "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden? Ever since I became yours, to this day, was I ever disposed to do this to you?" The Hebrew phrase, hahaskin hiskanti, implies habitual behavior. This donkey has never acted this way before, and her question challenges Balaam to consider whether there might be a good reason for her unprecedented behavior. Then Balaam's eyes are opened, and he sees what the donkey has been seeing all along. An angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword, ready to kill him. The donkey's stubborn behavior wasn't disobedience. It was salvation. She could see the spiritual danger that Balaam, for all his prophetic abilities, had missed completely. You're a prisoner in the inner dungeon of the Roman prison in Philippi, and you're witnessing something that will change not just your circumstances, but your understanding of divine power. The year is approximately 50 CE, and 2 Jewish preachers named Paul and Silas have been thrown into the cell next to yours. They've been severely beaten and their feet are fastened in stocks, but instead of groaning in pain or cursing their captors, they're singing hymns and praying. The sound of their worship echoes through the stone corridors of the prison. You and the other prisoners are listening intently, not just because it's unusual to hear someone singing in this place of misery, but because there's something compelling about their voices. The Greek word epikronto suggests that you're not just hearing them, but listening carefully, trying to understand what could possibly make men sing in such circumstances. It's about midnight when the miracle begins. At first, you feel just a slight tremor in the ground beneath you. Living in the Roman world, you're familiar with earthquakes, but this one feels different. The shaking intensifies rapidly, and soon the entire prison is rocking back and forth. The massive stone walls groan and crack, and you hear the sound of metal snapping as chains break under the stress. But this isn't just a natural earthquake. The tremors seem focused specifically on the prison structure. The doors, heavy wooden barriers reinforced with iron, burst open simultaneously. Every single door in the entire complex swings wide, from the main entrance to the individual cells. The locks don't just break. They seem to dissolve under the force of the shaking. More remarkably, every prisoner's chains fall off. You feel the iron shackles around your wrists and ankles simply release, as if the metal itself has lost its binding properties. The Hebrew word pethach, used in similar contexts, suggests an opening or loosening that happens instantaneously. One moment you're securely bound, the next you're completely free. The other prisoners are amazed and terrified. Some head for the open doors, ready to escape into the night. But something about Paul and Silas's presence keeps most of you from fleeing. There's an aura of divine power surrounding them that makes you want to understand what's happening rather than simply take advantage of it. The prison keeper, awakened by the earthquake, rushes to the prison expecting to find it empty. Roman law dictated that guards who allowed prisoners to escape would face the same punishment the prisoners were meant to receive. Seeing the open doors, he assumes the worst and draws his sword to kill himself rather than face execution by his superiors. But Paul calls out in the darkness, "Do yourself no harm, for we are all here." The most remarkable aspect of this miracle isn't just that the earthquake freed the prisoners, it's that none of them chose to escape. The same divine power that opened the doors has somehow also changed the hearts of the prisoners, making them willing to remain despite having the opportunity to flee. You are living in Jerusalem during the early years of the Persian Empire, and you're witnessing the fulfillment of one of the most precisely timed prophecies in human history. The year is 538 BCE, and after 70 years of exile in Babylon, the Jewish people are finally being allowed to return to their homeland. But this isn't just a political development. It's the exact fulfillment of a prophetic timeline that was established decades before the exile even began. The prophet Jeremiah had declared that the exile would last exactly 70 years. Not approximately 70 years, not about 3 generations, but precisely 70 years. The Hebrew word shenim, used in the prophecy, is specific and unambiguous. It refers to complete solar years, not symbolic or metaphorical periods. This was a prediction that could be verified by simple calendar calculation. You remember the stories your grandparents told about the final days of Jerusalem. In 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar's army had destroyed the temple, burned the city, and carried away the surviving population to Babylon. The devastation was complete, not just military defeat, but the end of the nation as a political and religious entity. The temple, which had stood for over 400 years, was reduced to rubble. But even in the midst of that destruction, the prophets had insisted that the exile would be temporary. Jeremiah specifically promised that after 70 years, God would visit his people and bring them back to the land. Daniel, studying the prophecies while in exile, had calculated that the time was approaching and had prayed for the fulfillment of God's promise. Now, in 538 BCE, exactly 70 years after the exile began, Cyrus the Great issues a decree allowing the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. The timing is precise to the year. The Persian king, who doesn't worship the God of Israel, finds himself implementing a policy that fulfills Hebrew prophecy with mathematical exactness. You're among the first wave of returning exiles, and as you see the ruins of Jerusalem for the first time, you're struck by the accuracy of the prophetic timeline. The city is exactly as desolate as Jeremiah had predicted, but the restoration is beginning exactly when he said it would. The Hebrew phrase liset davar suggests that God is performing his word, actively bringing about what was promised. The rebuilding of the temple begins immediately, and you participate in laying the foundation stones. The older priests and Levites who remember the original temple weep when they see the new foundation because it seems small compared to Solomon's magnificent structure. But the younger people, who have never seen the original, shout for joy because they're witnessing the fulfillment of ancient promises. What makes this miracle particularly remarkable is its public nature. The 70-year timeline wasn't hidden or symbolic. It was a specific, verifiable prediction that could be tested by anyone with access to historical records. The Persian court officials, the Jewish exiles, and the people who remained in the land could all calculate the timing and verify its accuracy. You're living in Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee, and you're witnessing an interaction that reveals something profound about the relationship between divine power and practical human needs. The year is approximately 30 CE, and Jesus has been teaching and performing miracles throughout the region. But today, the issue isn't healing or feeding crowds. It's about taxes. The collectors of the temple tax have approached Peter, asking whether his teacher pays the half-shekel tax that every Jewish male is required to contribute annually for the maintenance of the temple. The Greek word didrachma refers to a coin worth 2 drachmas, equivalent to the Hebrew half-shekel. This isn't the Roman tax, but a religious obligation that connects Jews to their central place of worship. Peter, apparently assuming that Jesus would want to fulfill this obligation, answers yes, without consulting his teacher. But when he enters the house where Jesus is staying, he finds himself in an unexpected theological discussion about the nature of taxation and divine authority. Jesus asks him a probing question. From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers? The logic is clear. Earthly kings don't tax their own children, only foreigners and subjects. Since Jesus is the Son of God, and the temple is his Father's house, he should logically be exempt from paying taxes for its maintenance. Peter begins to understand that he's made an assumption about Jesus' obligations that may not be accurate. But rather than making a political statement about tax resistance, Jesus chooses to avoid giving offense. Nevertheless, lest we offend him, he says, indicating that sometimes it's better to comply with expectations rather than assert your rights. The Greek word scandalizo suggests causing someone to stumble or fall. Jesus doesn't want the tax collectors to be confused or upset by his refusal to pay. Then Jesus gives Peter instructions that seem almost whimsical. Go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you. The Greek word stater refers to a coin worth 4 drachmas, exactly enough to pay the temple tax for 2 people. You watch as Peter, probably feeling somewhat foolish, makes his way to the shore with his fishing equipment. The idea of finding a coin in a fish's mouth seems absurd, but Peter has learned to trust Jesus' unusual instructions. He casts his line into the familiar waters where he's fished all his life and waits for the first fish to bite. When Peter pulls in his catch and opens the fish's mouth, there's the coin exactly as Jesus predicted. The stater gleams in the sunlight, bearing the image of Caesar and worth precisely what's needed to pay the temple tax for both Jesus and Peter. You're witnessing a miracle that combines divine foreknowledge with practical provision, showing that God's power extends even to the contents of fishes' mouths. You're standing in the courtyard of King Hezekiah's palace in Jerusalem, and you're about to witness something that will challenge everything you think. You know about the nature of time and divine power. The year is 701 BCE, and your king has just recovered from a life-threatening illness after receiving a promise from God that he would live for 15 more years. But Hezekiah, being a wise ruler, has asked for a sign to confirm this promise. The prophet Isaiah has offered the king a choice. Should the shadow on the sundial go forward 10 degrees or backward 10 degrees? The Hebrew word, malat, can refer to steps on a staircase or to degrees of measurement. And the sundial of Ahaz was probably a step structure that marked time by the position of shadows cast by the sun. Hezekiah, demonstrating the wisdom that has made him one of Judah's most respected kings, chooses the more difficult option. It is an easy thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. He reasons, no, but let the shadow go backward 10 degrees. You understand his logic. Anyone might be able to create an illusion of time moving forward slightly faster than normal. But to make time appear to move backward requires divine intervention. You're watching the sundial carefully as Isaiah prays. The afternoon sun is casting a clear shadow on the steps, and you can see exactly where the shadow falls. The normal progression of time would move the shadow steadily downward as the sun continues its journey across the sky. But as Isaiah finishes his prayer, something extraordinary happens. The shadow begins to move upward, against the natural direction of the sun's movement. You watch in amazement as the shadow moves not 1 degree backward, but the full 10 degrees that Hezekiah requested. The Hebrew text uses the word wayashav, and it returned, suggesting that the shadow retraced its path exactly. This isn't just a local phenomenon affecting only the sundial. For the shadow to move backward 10 degrees, either the Earth would reverse its rotation temporarily, or the sun would have to move backward in its apparent path across the sky. Either way, the miracle affects the entire cosmic system, not just a local timepiece. What makes this miracle even more remarkable is its international implications. The Babylonian astronomers, who were the most sophisticated timekeepers in the ancient world, apparently noticed this astronomical anomaly. Later historical sources suggest that they sent envoys to Jerusalem to investigate the phenomenon that had disrupted their carefully maintained celestial calendars. You realize that you're witnessing something that affects not just Hezekiah's health, or even the nation of Judah, but the entire cosmic order. Time itself, which seems so fixed and unchangeable, has proven to be subject to divine authority. The creator of time can manipulate it, reverse it, or redirect it according to his purposes. You're standing with the army of Israel outside the fortified city of Jericho, and you're part of what might be the strangest military campaign in history. The year is approximately 1400 BCE, and after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites have finally entered the Promised Land. But the first city you need to conquer presents a seemingly impossible challenge. Jericho's walls are massive. Archaeological evidence suggests they were 12 to 15 feet thick and up to 30 feet high. The Hebrew word choma refers to defensive walls specifically designed to withstand siege warfare. These aren't just barriers. They're sophisticated military engineering designed to make the city impregnable. The walls are built on a foundation of large stones, with the upper portions made of mud brick reinforced with wooden beams. But instead of building siege engines, constructing battering rams, or digging tunnels under the walls, Joshua has received instructions from the Lord that seem almost absurd from a military perspective. You and the entire army are to march around the city once a day for 6 days, led by 7 priests carrying trumpets made from ram's horns. The Ark of the Covenant will be carried in the procession, but no one is to say a word during the march. You participate in this strange ritual for 6 days, walking silently around the city walls while the priests blow their trumpets. The Hebrew word shofar refers to the curved horns used for religious ceremonies, not military signals. The people of Jericho watch from their walls, probably wondering what kind of bizarre siege tactic this is supposed to be. On the 7th day, the instructions change. Instead of marching around the city once, you're to circle it 7 times. The repetition of the number 7 throughout this narrative emphasizes the sacred nature of what's happening. This isn't just military strategy. It's a religious ritual that will demonstrate divine power over human fortifications. After the 7th circuit on the 7th day, Joshua gives the signal you've been waiting for. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The Hebrew word haru is a battle cry. but it's also an expression of worship and triumph. You and thousands of other Israelites raise your voices in a unified shout that echoes off the walls of Jericho. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. The walls of Jericho don't just crack or develop breaches. They collapse completely. The Hebrew phrase "Wadipol ha'chomatashtea" means the wall fell down under itself, a description that suggests the walls didn't just tip over, but fell straight down, as if the foundation itself had suddenly given way. You watch in amazement as the massive fortifications that seemed so impregnable moments before are reduced to rubble. The collapse is so complete that you can walk straight into the city over the fallen stones. Only one section of wall remains standing, the portion where Rahab's house is located, exactly as Joshua had promised. You're part of a crowd of about 5,000 men, plus women and children, who have followed Jesus to a remote area near the Sea of Galilee. The day has been extraordinary. You've watched Jesus heal the sick, teach with unprecedented authority, and demonstrate a compassion that draws people from throughout the region. But as evening approaches, you're becoming increasingly aware of a practical problem. You're miles from any town, and everyone is getting hungry. The disciples seem to be discussing this problem with Jesus, and you overhear their suggestion that he should send the crowds away to buy food in the nearby villages. It's a reasonable proposal. There's no way to feed this many people in the middle of nowhere. But Jesus' response surprises everyone. They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. You watch as the disciples look at each other with expressions of confusion and mild panic. The Greek word "phago" that Jesus uses means not just a snack, but a proper meal. He's asking them to provide dinner for potentially 20,000 people, counting women and children. Their response is understandable. We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. The loaves aren't large bread like you might imagine. The Greek word artos refers to small, flat rounds of bread, probably about the size of a modern dinner roll. The fish are similarly modest, likely dried or pickled fish that would serve as a simple meal for a few people. This is clearly a boy's lunch, not provisions for feeding a multitude. But Jesus takes the meager offering and does something that seems almost ritualistic in its simplicity. He looks up to heaven. The Greek word anablipo suggests a deliberate, reverent gaze and blesses the food. This isn't a long, elaborate prayer, but a simple expression of gratitude to God for his provision. Then he breaks the bread and gives it to the disciples to distribute. What happens next defies every natural law you understand. As the disciples begin distributing the bread and fish, the food doesn't diminish. Instead, it seems to multiply in their hands. Every person who reaches for a piece receives fresh, warm bread and fish. The Greek word eklousin suggests that the bread was broken repeatedly, as if each breaking produced more food rather than less. You receive your portion and find it completely satisfying. The bread is fresh and filling, the fish properly prepared and flavorful. But as you eat, you're aware that thousands of other people are eating the same meal from the same original source. The miracle isn't just that everyone gets fed. It's that everyone gets fed well, with food that tastes as if it were prepared specifically for them. After everyone has eaten their fill, Jesus instructs the disciples to collect the leftover fragments so that nothing is wasted. The Greek word parasusin indicates abundance beyond what was needed. The disciples gathered 12 baskets full of leftover bread and fish, more food remaining than what they started with. You're in a boat on the Sea of Galilee with Jesus and his disciples, and you're experiencing one of the most terrifying natural phenomena known to sailors on this body of water. The day began peacefully enough. Jesus had suggested crossing to the other side of the lake, and the disciples, many of whom were experienced fishermen, had readily agreed. But as you make your way across the water, the weather begins to change rapidly. The Sea of Galilee is known for sudden, violent storms. Its location below sea level, surrounded by mountains, creates a unique meteorological situation where calm water can become treacherous within minutes. The Greek word seismos, used to describe what happens, suggests not just wind, but a shaking or convulsing of the very elements themselves. You watch as the wind intensifies and the waves grow larger. What started as gentle swells becomes a series of massive waves that begin to break over the sides of the boat. The experienced fishermen in the group are becoming genuinely alarmed, and you can see the concern in their faces as they work to keep the boat afloat. The Greek word kataklizo means to be flooded or overwhelmed. The boat is taking on water faster than it can be bailed out. Throughout this chaos, Jesus remains asleep in the stern of the boat, his head resting on a cushion. The Greek word kathudo suggests deep, peaceful sleep, not the fitful rest of someone trying to ignore a crisis, but the profound sleep of someone who is completely at peace. While everyone else is fighting for their lives, Jesus is sleeping as soundly as if he were in his own bed. Finally, the disciples wake him with words that reveal both their fear and their faith. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" The Greek word apolumi means to be destroyed or to die. They're not just uncomfortable or inconvenienced. They genuinely believe they're about to die. But their question also reveals their belief that Jesus has the power to do something about their situation. Jesus awakens and immediately addresses the storm itself. He doesn't pray to God for intervention, doesn't perform any ritual or ceremony. He simply speaks directly to the wind and the waves. "Peace, be still." The Greek word phamu means to muzzle or silence. Jesus is treating the storm like a wild animal that needs to be controlled. The response is immediate and complete. The wind doesn't gradually die down. It stops instantly. The waves don't slowly subside. They become completely calm. The Greek word galein describes the kind of perfect calm that comes when there's no wind at all, when the water becomes like glass. Within seconds, the boat goes from being in mortal danger to floating on perfectly still water. You're left staring at Jesus with a mixture of awe and fear. The disciples ask each other, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The Greek word hupakuo means to hear and respond to authority. The natural elements have responded to Jesus' voice as if they were trained servants receiving commands from their master. You're walking with Jesus and his disciples on the road between Bethany and Jerusalem, and you're about to witness a miracle that reveals something profound about the nature of divine judgment and the power of faith. The morning is fresh and clear, and Jesus, like the rest of the group, is feeling the normal human sensation of hunger after a night's rest. Ahead of you, growing beside the road, is a fig tree in full leaf. The Greek word souk refers to the common fig tree that was cultivated throughout Palestine, a tree that typically produced fruit twice a year. From a distance, the tree looks healthy and productive, its abundant foliage suggesting that it should be bearing fruit. Fig trees leaf out in fruit almost simultaneously, so a tree with this many leaves should definitely have figs. Jesus approaches the tree, expecting to find the early figs that should be available at this time of year. The Greek word souk, used here, refers not to the main harvest, which comes later, but to the small, early fruits that appear before the leaves are fully developed. These early figs are edible and would provide a satisfying snack for a hungry traveler. But when Jesus examines the tree carefully, he finds nothing but leaves. The tree has the appearance of fruitfulness without the reality. It's what farmers call a show tree. Impressive to look at, but ultimately unproductive. The Hebrew concept of fruit-bearing was deeply connected to purpose and usefulness. So a fruitless tree was seen as failing to fulfill its created purpose. Jesus responds to this disappointment with words that seem harsh, but carry deeper significance. "Let no one eat fruit from you ever again." The Greek word maketi means no longer or never again. This isn't a temporary judgment, but a permanent change in the tree's nature. The disciples hear this pronouncement and probably wonder what effect, if any, words spoken to a tree might have. You continue on your way to Jerusalem, where Jesus will cleanse the temple and confront the religious leaders about their failure to produce spiritual fruit. The connection between the fruitless fig tree and the spiritually barren religious establishment isn't lost on those who understand the symbolism. But the immediate impact of Jesus' words isn't immediately apparent. The next morning, as you return along the same road, Peter notices something extraordinary. The fig tree that was so leafy and impressive yesterday is now completely withered. The Greek word zerano means to dry up or wither, but this isn't gradual decay. It's complete desiccation. The tree has died from the roots up, so thoroughly that it looks as if it's been dead for months. "Rabbi, look! The fig tree, which you cursed, has withered away," Peter exclaims. The Greek word kataramai means to curse or pronounce judgment upon. What seemed like mere words spoken to an inanimate object has proven to be a demonstration of divine authority over the natural world. The tree has died not from disease or drought, but from the power of Jesus' word. You're standing in the temple courtyard in Jerusalem, watching one of the most subtle yet profound miracles in the gospel accounts. The year is approximately 30 CE, and Jesus has been teaching in the temple when a group of scribes and Pharisees approaches him with what they believe is a trap question. They're holding a Roman denarius, a silver coin bearing the image of Caesar, and they're about to ask Jesus whether it's lawful to pay taxes to Rome. The political implications of this question are enormous. If Jesus says it's lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, he'll be seen as a collaborator with the Roman occupation, losing credibility with the Jewish people who resent foreign rule. If he says it's not lawful, he can be accused of sedition and reported to the Roman authorities. It's a carefully crafted question designed to destroy Jesus' ministry regardless of how he answers. "Show me the tax money," Jesus responds, and they produce the denarius. The Greek word denarian refers to a silver coin that was the standard daily wage for a laborer. It bears the image of Tiberius Caesar along with the Latin inscription, Tiberius Caesar Divi Augusti Filius Augustus. Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. The coin is a symbol of Roman power and authority, and carrying it demonstrates participation in the Roman economic system. But Jesus' response reveals something remarkable about the nature of temporal authority and divine sovereignty. Whose image and inscription is this? He asks. The Greek word icon means image or likeness, and epigrapha refers to the written inscription. These aren't just decorative elements. They're declarations of ownership and authority. In the Roman world, coins bearing Caesar's image were considered to belong to Caesar. "Caesar's," they reply, probably thinking they've successfully cornered Jesus into taking a political position. But Jesus' response transcends the political trap entirely. "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." The Greek word apodidami means to give back or return. Jesus is saying that since the coin belongs to Caesar, it should be returned to Caesar through tax payment. But the deeper miracle in this story isn't just Jesus' wisdom in avoiding the trap. It's his ability to discern the true nature of ownership and authority. The coin belongs to Caesar because it bears Caesar's image, but humans belong to God because they bear God's image. The same principle that makes it appropriate to return Caesar's coin to Caesar makes it essential to return God's image bearers to God. You watch as the Pharisees and scribes walk away, marveling at Jesus' answer. The Greek word thaumazo means to wonder or be amazed. They're not just impressed by his cleverness, but astounded by his ability to see through their trap to the deeper spiritual truth. They came to catch him in a political snare, but they've encountered a truth that redefines the relationship between earthly and heavenly authority. You're standing outside the tomb of Jesus on the first day of the week, and you're about to witness evidence of the most extraordinary miracle in human history. The tomb is a new one, carved out of rock, with a large stone that was rolled across the entrance to seal it. You were present when Jesus died on the cross. You saw his body taken down and prepared for burial. And you know beyond doubt that he was dead when he was placed in this tomb. But something has happened overnight that defies explanation. The massive stone that sealed the tomb has been moved aside, and the tomb itself is empty. The Greek word apokulio means to roll away, and this stone would have required several men to move it. Yet it has been displaced with such force that it appears to have been thrown aside rather than carefully rolled. As you peer into the tomb, you see something that makes no sense from a natural perspective. The linen cloths that were wrapped around Jesus' body are still there, but they're lying flat as if the body has simply vanished from within them. The Greek word athonion refers to the linen strips that were used to wrap corpses, and sudarion describes the face cloth that was placed over the head. What's remarkable is the position of these grave cloths. If someone had stolen the body, they would have unwrapped it or taken the entire bundle. If Jesus had simply revived from unconsciousness, the cloths would have been disturbed or removed. But these wrappings are lying exactly where they were placed, as if the body has passed through them without disturbing their arrangement. The face cloth is in a separate place from the body wrappings, folded neatly by itself. The Greek word entolisso means to wrap up or fold, and the perfect tense suggests that this folding was done deliberately and carefully. This isn't the hasty work of someone trying to escape or the random result of someone removing grave clothes. It's the careful, purposeful arrangement of someone who wanted to leave clear evidence of what had happened. You realize that you're looking at evidence of a resurrection that transcends natural law. The body of Jesus has been transformed into something that can pass through solid matter without disturbing it. The linen cloths that contained a dead body now contain only empty space, but they retain the shape and position that the body gave them. The disciples who arrive after you are amazed by what they see. The Greek word pistou indicates not just intellectual belief, but the kind of faith that transforms a person's entire worldview. They're not just seeing evidence of a miracle. They're encountering proof that Jesus has conquered death itself, that the grave could not hold him, and that his claims about his divine nature have been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. You're tending your father-in-law's sheep in the wilderness of Midian, and you're experiencing the routine of pastoral life in one of the most desolate regions of the ancient world. The year is approximately 1450 BCE, and you're Moses, though you don't yet know the role you'll play in history. You're in exile from Egypt, living the quiet life of a shepherd after fleeing from Pharaoh's justice 40 years ago. The wilderness of Midian is harsh and unforgiving. The Hebrew word midbar refers not just to a dry place, but to a place of driving away, a region where survival requires constant vigilance and intimate knowledge of the terrain. You know, every rock, every spring, every patch of vegetation that might provide food for the sheep. This is your world now, far from the palaces and politics of Egypt. As you lead the flock toward Mount Horeb, you notice something unusual in the distance. It appears to be a bush on fire, which isn't particularly remarkable in this dry climate. The Hebrew word senna refers to a thorny bush, probably what we would call a thorn bush or bramble. Such bushes can catch fire easily during the dry season, and you've seen many similar fires during your years as a shepherd. But as you watch this fire, you realize that something is wrong with what you're seeing. The bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. The flames are real. You can see them dancing and flickering in the desert air, but the bush itself remains intact. The Hebrew phrase lo akol means not consumed or not devoured. The fire is burning without fuel, maintaining itself without destroying its source. Your curiosity is aroused, and you decide to turn aside to investigate this phenomenon. The Hebrew word sir means to turn aside or deviate from your path. This isn't just casual interest. You're deliberately leaving your route to examine something that doesn't make sense according to your understanding of the natural world. As you approach the burning bush, you hear something that changes everything. A voice calling your name. Moses, Moses! The repetition of your name suggests urgency and intimacy. This isn't a general call, but a specific summons from someone who knows you personally. The Hebrew word kara means to call or summon, and it's the same word used when a master calls a servant. Your response is immediate and respectful. Here I am. The Hebrew phrase hineni expresses not just location, but availability and readiness to serve. You're acknowledging that you've heard the call and are prepared to respond to whatever is asked of you. The voice continues with a command that reveals the sacred nature of what you're experiencing. Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. The Hebrew word kadosh means set apart or sacred. The ordinary patch of desert where you're standing has become a meeting place between heaven and earth, transformed by the presence of the divine. You're standing with approximately 2 million other Israelites at the shore of the Red Sea, and you're experiencing what might be the most desperate moment in your nation's history. Behind you, you can hear the thunder of Egyptian chariots and the shouts of Pharaoh's army as they pursue you across the desert. Ahead of you stretches an expanse of water that seems to make escape impossible. You're trapped between the army of the most powerful nation on earth and a body of water that no one can cross. The Hebrew name for this body of water is Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. While scholars debate the exact location, what's clear is that it represented an insurmountable barrier to the fleeing Israelites. You have no boats, no bridges, no way to cross. The water extends as far as you can see in both directions, and its depth makes wading impossible. You're facing a dead end in the most literal sense. The people around you are beginning to panic. Some are crying, others are arguing, and many are expressing anger at Moses for leading them into this trap. Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? They cry. The Hebrew word kavar means to bury, and the sarcasm in their voices reflects their belief that they've been led from slavery to death. But Moses responds with words that seem to defy the evidence of your senses. Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. The Hebrew word Yeshua means salvation or deliverance, and it's the same root from which the name Jesus is derived. Moses is promising divine intervention in a situation that appears hopeless. Then Moses stretches out his hand over the sea, and something begins to happen that challenges everything you know about the natural world. The Hebrew text says that the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The word baka means to split or cleave, suggesting that the water is literally torn apart. You watch in amazement as the waters begin to pile up on both sides, creating a corridor of dry ground through the middle of the sea. The Hebrew word choma means wall, and that's exactly what the water becomes. Two massive walls of water held back by divine power. The seafloor, which moments ago was covered by fathoms of water, becomes a highway for the people of Israel. The crossing begins immediately. You join the massive procession of people, animals, and possessions as the entire nation moves through the corridor between the walls of water. The ground beneath your feet is dry, not muddy or marshy, but completely dry, as if the water has never been there. The Hebrew word yabashah emphasizes the complete absence of moisture. As you walk through the sea, you can see the walls of water on both sides, held back by invisible force. Fish swim in the suspended water, and you can see the normal life of the sea continuing within the walls. But the water itself cannot flow into the path where you're walking. It's as if the natural law of gravity has been suspended for this specific corridor. You're standing in a garden just outside Jerusalem on the third day after the crucifixion, and you're about to witness the event that will transform not just your understanding of Jesus, but the entire course of human history. The tomb where Jesus was buried is carved out of rock, sealed with a massive stone, and guarded by Roman soldiers. Death has seemingly claimed another victim, even if this victim was someone who claimed to be the Son of God. The events of the previous days have been devastating. You watched Jesus die on the cross, saw his body taken down and prepared for burial, and witnessed the stone being rolled across the tomb entrance. The Hebrew word kavar means to bury, and in the ancient world, burial was final. Death was an enemy that no one had ever defeated, a boundary that no one had ever crossed and returned. But as dawn breaks on the first day of the week, something begins to happen that defies every natural law and challenges every assumption about the nature of life and death. The earth begins to shake, not with a natural earthquake, but with what can only be described as a cosmic tremor. The Greek word seismos suggests a shaking that affects not just the physical world, but the very foundations of reality. An angel of the Lord descends from heaven and rolls back the stone from the tomb entrance. The Greek word apokulio means to roll away, but this isn't the careful work of men trying to open a sealed tomb. The stone is moved with such force that it appears to have been thrown aside, and the Roman guards are so terrified that they become like dead men themselves. But the real miracle isn't the moving of the stone. It's what the open tomb reveals. The body of Jesus is gone, but the grave clothes remain exactly where they were placed. The linen wrappings that contained his body are lying flat and undisturbed, as if the body has simply vanished from within them. The face cloth is folded neatly in a separate place, arranged with the care of someone who wanted to leave clear evidence of what had happened. You realize that you're witnessing something that transcends natural law entirely. This isn't resuscitation, the return of someone who was unconscious or nearly dead. The Greek word anastasis means a standing up from death, a complete victory over the grave. Jesus has been transformed into something that can pass through solid matter, that can appear and disappear at will, that has conquered death itself. The implications of what you're seeing are staggering. If Jesus has truly risen from the dead, then his claims about his divine nature are vindicated. His promise that he would rise again on the third day has been fulfilled exactly as he predicted. Death, which seemed to be the final word in his story, has proven to be merely a temporary interruption in his eternal existence. The women who came to anoint his body are the first to encounter the risen Jesus. The Greek word chairo means to rejoice, and that's exactly what they do when they recognize him. But this isn't just happiness at seeing a friend again. It's the joy of witnessing the defeat of humanity's greatest enemy. Death has been conquered, the grave has been emptied, and the promise of eternal life has been demonstrated as reality. You watch as the news of the resurrection spreads to the disciples, then to the broader community of believers, and eventually to the entire world. The Greek word kerygma means proclamation or preaching, and the message of Jesus' resurrection becomes the foundation of a new faith that will transform civilization itself. The tomb that was meant to be the end of Jesus' story has become the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have imagined. As we reach the end of tonight's journey through the most bizarre and forgotten miracles of biblical history, you've encountered stories that reveal something profound about the nature of divine power and human faith. These weren't just ancient fairy tales or symbolic narratives. They were events that challenged the natural order and demonstrated that the God of the Bible operates beyond the boundaries of what we consider possible. From the floating axe head that saved a poor student from debt to the resurrection that conquered death itself, these miracles share common themes that speak to the deepest needs of human experience. They show us a God who cares about practical concerns like lost tools and tax money, who intervenes in a natural world to protect and provide for his people, and who ultimately has authority over life and death themselves. But perhaps most importantly, these strange and wonderful stories remind us that the world is far more mysterious and miraculous than our modern assumptions allow. In an age when we think we understand the laws of nature, these biblical accounts suggest that those laws are more like guidelines that can be suspended, redirected, or transcended when divine purposes require it. The ancient people who first heard these stories weren't necessarily more gullible than we are. They were simply more open to the possibility that the universe contains realities beyond what we can measure, predict, or control. Their worldview made room for mystery, for divine intervention, for the impossible becoming possible through the power of faith. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let these stories settle into your consciousness like seeds planted in fertile soil. Let them remind you that the world is full of wonder, that the impossible is possible, and that the God who made iron swim and caused the sun to move backward is still actively involved in the affairs of this world. These miracles may have happened thousands of years ago, but they speak the timeless truths about the nature of divine love, power, and grace. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be filled with the peace that comes from knowing that the God of impossible miracles is still working in the world today.